Thanks, bud.
So I'm back on Newton Lake. I had just been here about 3 weeks prior for the Illinois Bass Kayak Series, but we're here on Newton Lake for stop number 2 of the KBL Kayak Series. And Newton Lake is one of my favorite places to fish. It is a fantastic chatterbait lake. You can tie up a chatterbait and typically have a great day on the water. And a deep crank in the summer is fantastic as well. But again, you can put a chatterbait in your hand, toss it up shallow, and bring it back towards you, and usually have a pretty good day doing that. So that was my plan of attack today, was to really just put the chatterbait in my hand again and see where they had moved. So this was still, early May, and most places here in Illinois were, in pre-spawn. But here in Newton, because it is a power plant lake, it does stay warm year round. It doesn't really ever freeze over either, and so you could pretty much find them spawning somewhere on the lake any time of the year, or getting ready to. So, for me, my thought process here was I already knew kind of the area they were in last time, where they had pushed into, and I wanted to see, are they still in that general area? Have they moved maybe near the back of creeks, or have they moved more onto the main lake, or are they really hogged on to the reeds and grass? Just really what kind of wanted to get a feel for them. And so I kind of already knew they were going to be up on reeds. I knew a lot of the people that had gotten their limits in the last tournament that was here at Newton had been flipping reeds. So I kind of had a feeling that, reeds may be the juice for this tournament. So I went to the first bank that I could find with reeds, and really kind of just wanted to kind of fish the outsides up, kind of buzz it around. I wasn't gonna really get up into the reeds at this moment. I kind of wanted to see, could I get some to kind of come out of the reeds and attack a bait fish. And if I could do that, then I could know that, okay, come tournament time, I could definitely put on, a punching rig, a flipping rig, and flip into the reeds and pick some out that are kind of deeper in there. But right now, like I said, I'm really taking the chatterbait and buzzing it past a lot of these reeds, some of these points and structures and laydown. And the chatterbait for me is really just a fantastic all-around bait. Throw it up shallow, up and rip rap along laydowns, along weeds, reed lines, grass lines, run it through the grass. You can even, work it like a normal jig and crawl along the bottom and kind of jig it up, and that blade will, activate and give it a little bit more action and sound. Just got to be a little bit more careful with it because it is that exposed hook, but once it gets moving and that blade's in front of it, it's pretty weedless, and it can come through a lot. But I like it just because it matches my fishing style, which is kind of that chuck and wind. Just chucking out your bait, winding it back in, rinse and repeat. That's kind of what I like to do and how I like to fish. I like to cover a lot of water. In tournaments, once I find them, I pretty much kind of stay in that area and really work it. But in practice, I like to cover as much water as I possibly can, get an idea of where they're at, where they're moving, are they staging up, are they are they all spawned out, and are they kind of backed off. And so I really wanted to make sure I could put together a pretty decent game plan for tournament day. Now, Newton Lake is, in my opinion, a morning bite lake. If you're unable to get your limit by 9 a.m. on tournament day, it's probably going to be a grind for the rest of the day to try to get that, because the bite does absolutely shut off around the midday and doesn't really turn back on again until the early afternoon. So the key for me, and I know for a lot of anglers on the water, is to get your morning bite, or to get your morning limit as early as you can, so that you're, spending the rest of the morning on that morning bite trying to cull. And you can spend that mid-morning and the early afternoon, either going to another spot that's a little further away, or really slowing down and picking apart an area and trying to maybe finesse them out of an area or over across structure. Right now, I wanted to try some different areas. My I purposely was not going to go to any of the areas that I knew I wanted to spend some time during tournament day. And, I didn't really want to blow up those spots before even getting there. So, today was really about, going to different areas that were similar to where I knew I was catching fish, but this, could I catch a limit or catch some pretty big fish in these areas before, moving back into some of the areas that I knew were going to hold some of the larger ones. So right here, I'm able to catch a couple decent fish, actually. I'm not sure if you can really see it that well, but right in front of me is a point, and on that point is a log that kind of extends out pretty far, about 6 feet into that water. What I'm doing is casting my chatterbait up into that laydown. I'm casting it past laydown and bringing it past, bringing it over it and through it. I'm casting right up into it. And I really like, most of my baits, whether it's a jig, a crankbait, a Texas rig, or in this case, a chatterbait, to kind of disturb and knock around in some of that structure and lay down and fishing. And sometimes you're going to get that reaction bite from those bass. It's kind of like, somebody comes into your house and starts banging on the walls. You're going to chase them out and get a little upset. So that's kind of my mindset in fishing structure. I kind of want to be able to. I want to get in there and really, make it intrusive for those bass. So, if you're not getting your lure hung up every now and then, a chatterbait, a jig, and especially like a crankbait, then in my mind you're not fishing it right. So now I know I can go and I can look and target points, and if they have grass, reeds, laydowns, even better. And if they have all four, then lights out. So basically, I know that I can find these points, and they're all over the lake, and catch bass. So, right now I'm thinking, okay, let's do one more kind of small cast in here. See, are they, can I get them on a flipping bite on a Texas rig? Newton white just works really, really well. I know that the water's pretty dirty, and everything in your brain's probably saying throw black and blue and dark colors. But white in this lake is just king. There's so much baitfish, so much shad that really need to match the hatch and go with white. I came over here because I knew there were four variables that were catching me bass, and that was reeds, grass, laydowns, or points. And so, in my mind, what I'm doing now is I want to isolate each one of those variables to see which condition is going to get me bit the most, which condition is going to get me the bigger fish. For an example, could just be all kinds of smaller fish around grass, for an example, as they're kind of just setting up for spawning, kind of pushing up, or maybe the reeds holding all the big bass because they've finished spawning and now they're ambushing and feeding up after their spawn. So isolating each one of those variables in my mind is refining that pattern, refining that strategy. And so as I'm coming up on the patch of reeds, I see this little patch of grass. I'm like, okay, so this is a combination of two variables, which is going to be reeds and grass, but I know that this combination isn't too uncommon on this lake, so I give it a couple of casts, and luckily, is rewarded with a couple of catches right around the grass. I wasn't the first bass that I caught here. I didn't really go deep into the grass to cast up into it. I kind of buzzed a little on the outside edge of the grass, still through it, but probably I'd say about 6 inches away from just the outside edge. And you can see this bass immediately try to swim into the reeds, which tells me they're using reeds for points of ambush, for safety, to get out of the sun. And maybe there's some bigger bass in the reeds as they're currently using it to spawn. So here I'm just tossing it back up a couple of times into that grass, really targeting and kind of fan casting where, I'm going from, the inside of that grass mat, moving my way towards the outside of it. And so, luckily, that's going to tell me, are they deep in the weeds? Are they on the outside of it? And so I don't have to spend all the time, casting up into weeds and pulling up off a bunch of grass, or blowing out the spot, or scaring away all the fish. So if I can get away with just kind of buzzing the outside and, and catching the fish, I much prefer that.
Thanks, bud. Thanks, bud.
So I'm coming up at the point at the end of the bank that I'm fishing here, and it was a fantastic bank. I had all the reeds, a couple of laydowns, but wasn't really able to find anything here. So I wanted to kind of see where they were at on points. Were they, what side of the point were they on, and how far were they off? Um, and I think the bite that I got here was kind of interesting. I was kind of trying to clear it from a little bit of what I thought was grass, and so basically what my chatterbait did was kind of sped through, rose up in the water, and then just died and just shot right down. And then that is when the bass picked up my chatterbait, was on that fall. So it kind of tells me that they may be kind of stacked up on these points, like kind of on the back sides of these points a little bit, waiting for bait fish to kind of come through, and so they can kind of ambush and pick them off. So now I'm coming on a stretch of bank that had some really good laydowns, some really big trees that would come out about 20, 30 feet from the bank, creating a lot of great habitat for bass and the bait fish that bass love to eat. So typically, laydowns like this are going to be hot spots for fish activity. Run a spinnerbait through it, a chatterbait, a jig, Texas rig, anything through it, and you'll probably get bit. Um, but again, just as many times as you're going to get bit, you're probably going to get hung up or snagged. So just kind of par for the course, really, whenever you're fishing, deep structure, or heavy laydowns, exposed trees, and some riprap like that. But even here, you can see that I'm looking down, and like um, I'm just on my side imaging. I'm looking at so many little blips on the map, little specks. They almost look like little grains of rice, and it's the hard return from that sonar telling me that there's a fish there. I kind of go past it a little bit. I had gone really kind of close to that cover, so I've probably scared anything that I had seen on my radar there. I've already probably scared them off, so wanted to kind of give it a little bit before turning back around and casting it back into that laydown, where I'd seen all those fish. was able to pick one up uh, right off of the edge, kind of a submerged brush pile down there at the edge of that tree. Wasn't really big, but it did tell me that they are still going to be hugging close to cover, and especially right around at this time of the day too. It was I want to say it was around like 11 o'clock, so the bite was really slow, but knowing that I could go up and find a log, find a tree, and pick one or two off, but just a little bit more insight and confidence builder come tournament day.
Just came out. Just came out. Thanks, buddy. Grass. Nice. Thanks, buddy.
So I'm coming up on this stretch of bank that always produces for me. And if you know about it, you know about it. I'm not showing too much of theirs, so you don't know how I got here or where it is. But if you know about it, you know about it. And I know that it is a somewhat well-known area. And if they're not here, then they're usually about 200, 300 yards away in a different area. I already know this about the spot. I knew that I was going to be coming here on tournament day, so what I wanted to do is see, are they here? Or do I need to go to the other area where they'll be? But luckily they were. The reason why I like this bank is just because it's a perfect bank for bass to ambush bait fish, and it's the reason why I believe the chatterbait works so well along this stretch. You can see right now that I'm fishing an outside weed line, and the weed line here is pretty defined because right after the weed line is a little bit of a drop off. So what these bass are able to do and what they have is access to deep water, grass to get out of the sun, to go chase and eat fish, and also for staging, right, for spawning. This is a perfect area for them with the cover that they're going to have, with a soft cover with the grass, but it's also kind of a harder bottom and access to deeper water. So I do kind of spend a little bit of time here. It was a little later in the day. I was getting a little. I was hankering for a bite, so I kind of wanted to fish it a little bit. I know that I have another day of practice, so I won't be coming back here tomorrow. So I just kind of wanted to, feel that tug and reel in some fish here. What I do with every patch of grass that I come up on is I fish all around it, and I'm very methodical about it. Of how I'll go from each side, and then kind of start working my way in. I want to make sure that I'm covering everything that I can see, but also some of the structure that I can't. So, for an example, where I'm casting right now. Off screen is in between this grass line and a laydown, which looks like just open water. But I know that that laydown is creating almost a channel in those weeds, right, where those weeds aren't going to be growing. And so, what I'm hoping that my bait is doing is it's going through basically one side of that clearing where that like limb has knocked down all that grass, kind of going through in that lane and then diving back through on the other side of the grass where I can then rip it out looking like a fleeing bait fish. And I know that's a lot to kind of put together, but basically what I'm doing is making it look like a bait fish is fleeing. It was fleeing into the grass, came out the other side into an open lane where I'm hoping bass are kind of like sitting, kind of patrolling that open area. And then, that bait fish is like, oh crap, and then kind of fleeing into the grass again, and you can get a lot of reaction bites from that. So I had dinner that night with some other guys that were in the derby, and I don't know, I'm kind of weird when it comes to fishing chatterbaits. Everybody else likes to do half ounce, 3/4 ounce, ounce, even chatterbaits to get down there low and really start messing things up. I, on the other hand, like to go as light as I possibly can. 1/4 ounce, 3/8 ounce. 3/8 ounce is really the heaviest I will go with the chatterbait. I like to fish that top middle column, and if I need to fish that bottom column, then I just let it sink and then I slow roll it. And I find that I get more bites with just a lighter setup, than I do with heavier setups. I also like jackhammers over, like for an example, thunder crickets. Jackhammers, I feel like, hunt a little better and they stay in that top mid water column easier, where I feel as the thunder crickets like to stay at the bottom. And again, it's I guess it's two different presentations and two different lines of thought. Because I like to throw a chatterbait primarily shallow, I want to go light because I know I'm going to be, getting up there in the nasty stuff and the weeds and the laydowns and the rocks, and I don't want it to get bogged down in that stuff. So I want to go as light as I possibly can. If I want to do deep, I'm probably not using a chatterbait to go deep. I'm using a jig or crankbait. Not really a deep chatterbait kind of guy. For the equipment and setup, outside of a 3/8 ounce or a 1/4 ounce chatterbait, I use a Z-Man Razor Shad, and it works similar to like a spunk shad. Think of it that way. I just like the profile that the Razor Shad gives, because it does give that full fin, but the way that it's cut and the way the fin is in a paddle, that tail is really quick, and that's the action that I like on my chatterbaits, right? Is because most of the action is going to be coming from that blade in the front. Your secondary action is also very important, especially on a chatterbait. And I find that like using a paddle tail can actually interfere or kind of work against some of that primary action with the blade. And it's the reason why you hear a lot of guys that'll use a paddle tail put the tail on upside down, to kind of counteract some of that action. Using like a straight tail, like a spunk shad or a razor shad, gives that tail a tighter wobble. And whenever you see like a bait fish fleeing or like you kind of injured, their tails aren't like kicking out like a boot tail does. It's a quick, very very tight, and so that's why I like to have those type of trailers on my chatterbaits. My chatterbait rod, I use 12-pound fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon does sink, and line weight and diameter does matter on the rate of sinkage. And 12-pound for me is what I found to be the best, for me to be able to have the best control of where I want that bait to be. Do I want it to be, just ticking the tops of the weeds, or do I want it to be like an inch in that weed, so it's kind of like really kicking it up, or do I want it to be down in there? And I feel like I have better control with 12-pound. My chatterbait rod is a 7.2 medium heavy fast action. I like a medium heavy. I like to have a little bit of that backbone, especially when you're ripping it out of cover. And I want a fast tip as well, because when I'm ripping it out of that cover, I want to be able to have that immediate, I guess, the immediate retrieval action again, right? When I feel like I've fished it on a moderate, and because of the power of a moderate rod, how it loads up, I feel like when you rip it out, it's not. I don't know, ripping out as much as it is kind of just pulling out. If that makes sense. A faster rod's really going to just rip that out, rip that chatterbait out. And with the added action of a chatterbait, that rip and that quick action is going to cause it to hunt and veer off from basically that straight line retrieve, which most often will give you a reaction bite as well. Reel, I like to use kind of a standard middle of run gear ratio. I think I'm using an 8:1 or 8:2 gear ratio right now. But I like a little bit of a faster reel with chatterbaits just because with chatterbaits you will get those bass that run at you and you have to catch up. Other species of fish love a chatterbait too, especially here in Illinois. I don't know what it is, or maybe it's just me, but catfish, drum. I've had carp eat it, walleye, pike, especially pike, muskie. So having a faster reel when you're, pike, for an example, love to run, and so having a reel to be able to catch up, keep that tension, is key. And especially when dealing with toothy critters, the last thing you want to do is give them slack or the chance for them to kind of roll into that line, which is going to allow them to kind of break you off with their teeth. Perfect timing. Here's me catching a channel cat off of a point near grass using a white chatterbait.
Oh, nice channel. Good eater. Nice bud. Line. Good bud.
But by now you should kind of already see that pattern, right? You should be able to see like, hey, everything where he's caught fish has been with these four parameters, whether it's grass, reeds, laydowns, or points. Those are the places he's been able to catch fish. And I know this because I talked to a couple guys after the tournament and asked them, hey, did you guys try deep cranking, ledge, jerk bait along the ledge? And one guy did catch a fish deep cranking, but a lot of guys I talked to said they weren't getting sniffed on the deep crank, and the flip and bite and punching bite really wasn't there either. So it was a great day of practice for me because I was able to pinpoint a pattern pretty early and then be able to pick apart that pattern to understand which elements of that pattern am I going to get bit. And so in my mind, and just because this is the way my mind works, I know that if I want to catch my limit early, I need to find reeds. If I want to start picking up, if I need to start calling, then I need to start flipping around in those reeds and flipping around in laydowns. And then, I know that points are going to hold the fish, which also means they're not going to be in the backs a lot of these channels. They're just not. They're going to be gathered up at the points and the mouths, being able to move off into the deeper water, whether they've already spawned out or they're getting ready to, and they're pushing up. They need to have a little bit of that deeper water. But this is what makes fishing fun for me, right? Is getting that, understanding that pattern, and then really that scientific method, right? Of forming a hypothesis and then testing the hypothesis. And the hypothesis I started out with was that those four structured areas, which is laydowns, grass, reeds, and points. and then removing each one of those variables, or isolating each one of those variables to see which condition is going to get me bit the most and produce the biggest bites. So hopefully you learned something from this video, or maybe you were just kind of entertained by me just kind of uh, stumbling around and kind of talking to myself. But if you did learn anything, or if you do enjoy fishing videos like the ones that I'm posting, or just like to see different bodies of water kind of get broken down, be sure to hit that subscribe button. It really helps out. And also, please hit that like and the bell. It takes 2 seconds, but for me, it really does mean a lot, and it helps the channel so much. Helps me grow, helps me get my videos out to more people, which allows me to do more of these tournaments and more of these videos. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. I had a blast. I love Newton, but I appreciate y'all watching. As always, get out there and fish. Tight lines, y'all.